Welcome members to today's special full council meeting. As per normal, I'm going to pass on now to John to take us through agenda 2 and 1.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, members. To all members of Derry City and Strabane District Council, you're hereby summoned to attend a special meeting of the Council to be held remotely today, Thursday, 7th of April at 4 o'clock. Alderman Breslin. Alderman Devaney.
Here, John.
Alderman Guy. Alderman Hussey.
Aye, online, John.
Alderman Carrigan. Alderman McClintock.
Here, John.
Alderman McCready. Alderman Ramsey. Alderman Wark.
Here, John.
Councillor Jason Barr.
Here, John.
Councillor Raymond Barr.
Here, John.
Councillor John Boyle.
Here.
Councillor Michaela Boyle.
Apologies.
Councillor Carr. Councillor Cusick.
Here, John.
Councillor Dobbins. Councillor Donnelly.
John.
Councillor Doyle.
Here, John.
Councillor Duffy.
And Shaw.
Councillor Edwards.
And Shaw, John.
Councillor Farrell.
Here.
Councillor Ferguson.
Here, John.
Councillor Fleming. Councillor Gallagher.
And Shaw, John.
Councillor Harkin. Councillor Heaney.
Shaw, John.
Councillor Jackson.
And Shaw, John.
Councillor Kelly. Councillor Logue.
Shaw, John.
Councillor McGinley.
And Shaw, John.
Councillor McGowan.
Shaw, John.
Councillor Maguire. Councillor McHugh.
Shaw, John.
Councillor McKeever. Councillor McKinney.
Apologies.
Councillor Mooney.
Here, John.
Councillor O'Neill.
Here.
Councillor Riley.
Here.
Councillor Sino Barr. Councillor Tierney.
Here, John.
Thanks, members. And just checking back on Alderman Breslin. Alderman Guy. Alderman Carrigan. Alderman McCready. Alderman Ramsey. Councillor Carr. Councillor Dobbins.
Yes, John, I'm here.
Councillor Ferguson.
Here, John.
Councillor Fleming.
Shaw, John.
Councillor Harkin. Councillor Kelly.
And Shaw, John.
Councillor Maguire. Councillor McKeever. And Councillor Sino Barr. Thank you, members. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, members. Thank you, John. Okay, members, agenda 3, statement of remote meetings. I'd like to remind everyone who's in remote attendance that this meeting will be broadcast live via the council YouTube channels and will be available for viewing in public and the media. The broadcast is also available for repeated viewing at a later date, and the broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with the council protocol. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting, to use the chat facilities to highlight the request to speak, and by participating in this meeting is consenting being filled and to be used as storage for those images for broadcast or training purposes, and for the purpose of keeping historic records and making those records available to the public. A copy of the council privacy notice may be found on the council webpage. Thank you, members, for that. Members, agenda 4, declaration of members' interest. They can be raised now or put forward in the chat box. Members. Agenda 5, Chairperson's Business. With your previous members, the City Solicitor, Philip, has a number of slides for today's meeting, and with your previous, I'd like members just to give me approval today for Philip to come in on that. And secondly, members, there is confidential business. Council officers, chief executive need to run by. So once we get today's business done, we'll be moving into confidential then, and we'll be going through that. So members, with your approval here, I am going to bring in the City Solicitor now, Philip.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, for the slide to come up. So members, very briefly, just want to give you some brief outline in relation to the options and avenues that the Council can take. This being the request that was put in respect of today's meeting. So firstly, members, just to clarify that the utility regulator is the body responsible for regulating the electricity, gas, water and sewerage industries in Northern Ireland. The utility regulator is an independent, non-policy making government department, and it has a duty to make sure that the energy and water utilities industries in Northern Ireland are regulated and developed within ministerial policy, which is set out in their statutory duties. There's about 5 or 6 pieces of legislation which would impact upon the work of the utility regulator, particularly in this instance, the energy order. Now, members, the status of as an independent non-policy making of government department probably influences the prospective approach that could be taken in relation to this matter. If you look on the utility regulator's website, it indicates that their work includes challenging companies to keep the prices they charge as low as they can be. So now then, just to provide some clarity, it's understanding that they just looking to get confirmation today and understanding confirmation that the decision which members are interested in looking at here is in relation to the conclusion of the utility regulator's review of Firmus Energy Supply Limited maximum average price in the 10 towns area. Derry obviously forming part of the 10 towns area, there being 3 areas within Northern Ireland which are divided up in terms of energy supply, but it's the 10 towns area that's relevant for the purposes of this council area. The maximum average price for Firmus's domestic and small business customers is set or is to be permitted to increase from 288.06 pence per therm to 335.04 pence per therm, equating to an increase of 16.31% to the bills of domestic and small business customers. Now, that decision of the regulator was published in a paper which was released in March of this year, and it will take effect from the 3rd of May 2022. Now, because we're looking at effectively a non-policy making government department, the most likely option of challenge that we would be considering in relation to this matter is judicial review. Briefly, members, that's a process by which the courts exercise a supervisory jurisdiction over the exercise of public functions by public bodies. It's important to note, members, that there are limitations to the scope of judicial review, and particularly a court has refused and will refuse to resolve factual disputes or to look at the substantive merits of decisions of public bodies. Primarily, the role of judicial review.
Apologies, Philip. Members, could you make sure your mics are turned off, please? Thank you. Go ahead, Philip.
Thank you, Mayor. So traditionally, the function is to ensure that decisions which have been taken are lawful, procedurally fair and rational. Now, further, members, when we're looking at judicial review, there's a number of steps in relation to the process. First point that I think it's important to note is that a claim for judicial review may only be brought by a complainant who has got what is known as standing to bring the judicial review. That means that they have to have a sufficient interest in the matter, and that's that's a legal interest in the matter rather than merely being interested in the matter, members. It's a specific legal test that has to be met in relation to that. If the court determines that a person does have sufficient standing, then there's a two-stage process which has to be undertaken. First of all, there's an application for leave to apply for judicial review, which has to be lodged. That has to be lodged within 3 months of the decision, which is being challenged. And the court will consider whether or not the claim is sufficiently serious and arguable before it will grant permission to proceed. That, members, obviously, if leave is granted, that's no guarantee of any form of success, because it's only if permission is granted that a matter would proceed to full hearing. It's important to note as well, members, that having even a successful hearing at judicial review even may not be worth bringing, because ultimately the outcome of any judicial review may result in ultimately the same or a less favourable outcome. That's because, members, one of the options and one of the most commonly used options for the court, as indeed this council itself has experienced, is that the decision which is made by the body is quashed and the matter is sent back to the body to reconsider further. That could result in the body making the same decision again, having rectified its processes, or indeed making another decision which might not be as favourable, if one can term it as such, as the previous decision, or indeed it could be one which is more favourable. Next then, members, would like to point out that, just again to clarify, it is extremely unlikely that a court in a successful judicial review will substitute its own decision for that of the public body, in this case the regulator. It'll be open to the public body to reconsider it. And one final point in this respect is that judicial review is a remedy of last resort. And consequently, in order to bring a judicial review, you will usually have to have exhausted any what's called a suitable alternative remedy which might be available. That could include a statutory right to appeal or appropriate private law proceedings. It's difficult in this instance, members, to see any potential for private law proceedings, but certainly we would need to fully examine whether or not there is any potential for a statutory right of appeal. Having considered all of those points, members, and looked at that, there are a number of steps which could potentially go forward from today. And the recommendation is that we would first of all go out and seek independent counsel's opinion on whether or not the council has standing to apply for judicial review. That's the first hurdle that needs to be overcome, members, because if we don't have standing, there's no point in taking this any further. In the event, members, that it was determined that we had standing, then the next step would be to get further advice on the merits of any potential application that might be brought against the utility regulator. So within the time frame for judicial review, there is time for us to go out and get that opinion. It can be obtained reasonably quickly, members, and would suggest and commend to you that that would be the appropriate first step. Then would be to go out and get an opinion on whether or not we have standing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred Philp. Councillor Doyle, as you have brought the meeting forward, yeah, I'm going to give you the courtesy of starting off. Councillor Doyle.
Mayor, and thanks to Philip for putting together that briefing in such a short period, and as well thanks to those who backed my call to have this meeting today. I said at the last full council meeting that we needed to think outside the box and try everything to try and protect people from these energy price rises that seem to have no end in sight. I don't buy that this is about Russia, and I don't buy that it's inevitable. The options open to us now are clear. We need to go and get expert advice on what we can do legally in acting against the energy regulator. My aim in all this is clear. The energy regulator has failed in their statutory responsibility to protect customers on the price and quality of the service they receive from energy companies. The courts have to be our next port of call. I want to see them place a stay on the recent tariff increase in the 10 towns area and review how public bodies can protect consumers, because it is coming from a place of greed, plain and simple. Article 14.2.3 of the Energy Order NI places a requirement for the regulator to have regard to vulnerable consumers, the chronically sick, those of pensionable age, and those of low incomes. That, to me, constitutes many of our constituents. We can lead the way in clarifying our powers as a council on this, Mayor, but make no mistake, if we get the green light to act, we should be reaching out to other councils to join the fight, and if needs be, share the cost. On behalf of all those who are sitting at home cold or are afraid of the very thought of having to buy more units for their meter, I want to move that we now do three things, and I'll put them in the chat box. That we approve the recommendations here today and immediately seek outside counsel on what our powers are. That the members here preemptively approve that when that advice comes back, that we convene another special council meeting to discuss its implications, and that we complain formally to the regulator due to their approval of price rises, which have negatively affected our constituents, so that if legal advice determines we aren't able to take court action, we will have already begun a formal process that could lead to the Northern Ireland Ombudsman investigating the complaint. I'm going to put that in the chat box, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, members, proposal on the table. Could I have a seconder, please? And that's seconded by Councillor O'Neill. Okay, members, Councillor Tierney, do you want to come on the proposal?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. And I suppose, first of all, thanks to Councillor Doyle for requesting that we have this special meeting. And as you'll be aware, Mayor, and other councillors will be aware, the SDLP were happy to support that call. We're also happy now to support the proposal before us. Councillor Doyle has mentioned widening this out to all councils within the 10 towns areas whenever this opinion comes back, and that's also something that we would be supporting, because we understand very clearly that it's not only people in the Derry City and Strabane District Council area that are being impacted by this, but everyone across the 10 towns area. And I'm sure that everyone feels the same way that we do across that particular area. Mayor, I'm speaking to people right across this city, from Culmore to the Brandywell and everywhere in between, and every area has been impacted by this cost of living crisis. And I think we need to act. We should be acting in the interests of the people that we represent. And I think that today's meeting and action coming from today's meeting will send out a message to people that we understand the hardships that people are suffering, and that we want to do what we can to try and help and support them. So we're happy to support that. But I have a few questions, I suppose, really for the city solicitor in relation to first and foremost, the proposal that's in front of us. Whilst we're working out and trying to get the opinion from legal counsel, can we also reach out to the other councils within the 10 towns area to see if there's an appetite there to come along with us on this journey around this process? Is that something that could be done in parallel with this process? Also, and I know that this is a long way off, Philip, so apologies if I'm asking you too soon, but at the very end of this process, if we are proven that, if it is proven in court and the JR is successful, what is the likely outcome? Can it be recommended that there is a freeze put on the prices of energy, and particularly gas, around within the 10 towns area? Or is it just going to be a slap in the knuckles for those people and those companies that put these prices up and didn't and they don't have to act. And at the end of this process, and at the end of when we receive the bill, there is no impact directly for people, because that's what we would like to see coming out of this. We want this process to actually have an impact for people. It's not, while I appreciate it's a legal process, it can't just be a legal process. It has to do something to ease the burden that our constituents are dealing with at the minute. And is there any outcome or any possible outcome that may happen? For example, the gas is going up 16% in the next 2 weeks. Is there a possibility that the GR could prove that it shouldn't have been allowed to go up, and that is brought back down, or is frozen at that price? Because unless this has an impact for people, I would question what's the point. Because a rap in the knuckles for these companies is not going to put credits in people's gas meter. It's not going to put food on people's tables. We are seeing prices rising on everything. Milk, the price of milk is going up 50%. Bread will not be long following, and all basic needs that people need is going up. And the only thing, Chairman, that isn't going up is people's wages. Is our energy better spent lobbying to make sure that the minimum wage is increased, or are we following a dead duck by going down this process? And I think that's something that we are fully in support of getting the legal opinion to see what the likelihood outcome of this is. But I want to know what the likely outcome is for people that we represent. How is this going to put credits in people's gas meter and food and people's presses? That's the main thing for us. But at this stage, Mr. Mayor, we're happy to support this process at the minute. But those are a few questions for the city solicitor, and I fully appreciate at this stage, Mr. Mayor, if the city solicitor is unable to answer them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Today. I'm going to bring in Alderman Derry Hussey first, and then we'll move to the city solicitor. He's a question reference to you on that. Then I'll bring yourself in, Phil. Alderman Hussey.
Thank you. Councillor Turney there has alluded to the fact that this impacts in 2 weeks' time. So my first question to Philip would be, can he give a potential timeline for the impact of actions the council would take? Secondly, what will the cost be to council? I would remind councillors that not all of the council area is impacted by this. The area that I represent does not fall within the 10 towns, but we're asking ratepayers from across the district to fund this. So I'd like to know what sort of costs we're looking at and how it will impact upon our ratepayers. And I'm particularly mindful of the dearth of services that I've constantly highlighted, and that others from my electoral area have highlighted. So it is a relevant fact going forward. I appreciate the context of the motion that's in front of us. It's fairly clear. It's following on from the advice that has been given by the city solicitor to seek that the external legal counsel as to our position, and indeed the issue of complaint. There isn't much there, but how far down the line can we take this? So as I say, timeline and cost. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for that, Alderman Hussey. So, Councillor Turner and Alderman Hussey have questions. We pass to now Philip. Philip.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So dealing with those questions, some of them tie in fairly neatly together. Councillor Tierney asked if we could reach out to the other councils in the area to see if there was an applicant to come along with us in the process. I think, to be honest with you, the first stage that, in terms of ascertaining whether or not it is believed that we have standing, would be the appropriate first step to take. I'm not sure that there's a great deal of point in reaching out to the other councils until such time as we've established whether or not there is standing. If we establish that there was standing, and consequently then we're minded to move on to the next stage, then it may be appropriate to discuss the matter with other councils at that stage to see if there was any appetite for them to come along with us. although a further point that needs to be noted in relation to that is that regardless of whether they want to come in along with us or not, a court may not permit other councils to come in relation to that if they feel that the decision can be, the matter can be adequately addressed by one council. Other councils wanting to come into the matter would have to seek the leave of the court to be permitted to come along. And that then, I think, ties in, I'm jumping here slightly to Alderman Hussey's first question, which was in relation to the timeline in relation to the matter. I envisage that we can get an opinion in relation to standing reasonably quickly. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that it would take months. I think we would probably be able to get an opinion in relation to standing within a matter of weeks. I've had some initial conversations with Council to look into that potential issue, and dependent on the outcome of today's meeting, Council is ready to start work on providing that opinion. The question then from Councillor Tierney was in relation to the likely outcome, and members, the likely outcome of a successful judicial review. And at this stage, I'm not commenting on whether it is likely that there would be a successful judicial review or not, but the likely outcome of a successful judicial review is that the decision of the regulator would be quashed and the regulator would be asked to make a fresh determination. And as I say, that then means that the regulator has got three options available to it at the end of a fresh determination, either to maintain the status quo, to make an outcome, make a decision which might be less favourable in terms of the fact that it might represent an increase in price, further increase in price, or it may make an outcome which would result in a freeze of the current price or a reduction in the amount of rice. It's impossible for us to say. This is a challenge to process, not a challenge to the actual merits of the decision itself. Final question then from Alderman Hussey was in relation to cost. Members will be aware from previous judicial reviews that we have had to set aside usually for a full judicial review with a couple of days hearing involved in it, involving two parties. Where we estimate costs of in the region of £60,000 to £80,000 for a judicial review. Those are costs that are met. Those are the costs of both sides. So that's the total cost of the action. Judicial review is an all duck no dinner thing when it comes to costs. So if we're successful in the judicial review, then the council's costs would have to be met by the regulator. If we're unsuccessful in the judicial review, then as well as our own costs, we would also have to meet the regulator's costs. So that global figure would be for the two sets of costs of £60,000 to £80,000. Thank you, members.
Thank you for that, Philip. Next on the list, I have Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Chair or Mayor, for allowing me in, and thank you, Philip, for the slides and the information provided. I'm going to be brief because we have well rehearsed much of the stuff we had from us in committee on Tuesday as well. So we had an opportunity there as well to put questions to them. Today, I have spent much of the day on the website of the utility regulator. I'm not confident that they have a lot of teeth, but the option is there. I thank Councillor Doyle for bringing this special meeting to allow us to look at the issue and to see if there is anything that we can be doing. I do think that we do have a moral responsibility to act in whatever way that we can. If we have the power and the ability to do something in terms of this cost of living crisis to protect people, then we should be doing it. So I think that we should be exploring all possible options. So I'm happy to support the proposal that's put before us and the recommendations that Philip has outlined. I had a number of questions in relation to what the possible outcome of the JR would be in terms of would it make an actual tangible impact on our citizens of the Strabane district or wider in terms of the 10 towns. Philip, you probably answered my question there in terms of the the JR and asking other council areas to join us, because if memory serves me right, we looked at something similar in relation to the JR around Dalradian and the mining issue, and we as a council moved first, and we had a number of other councils, Mid Ulster and Oman Fermanagh, who were willing and had actually agreed through their councils to join the JR and do sort of be part of the burden of the cost of that JR should we lose. And the court ruled that they couldn't join the JR at that stage. So I think, look, we have the information in front of us. We do have a moral obligation to act, and on the back of that, I'm happy to support that we go forward with these recommendations and see then what the legal opinion is coming back in terms of how what the likelihood is of us being successful at the end of it. I still am not convinced that the utility regulator has teeth to actually do anything, but we definitely need to be exploring it. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy. Councillor O'Neill.
And thanks to Councillor Doyle for bringing this proposal forward with people before profit. I think the times that we're in with the hardship crisis that is facing far too many people in our society, we really need to do all we can and fight tooth and nail to protect those hardest hit by this hardship crisis. And you know, and I think it's really positive that we're looking at all the options, including these legal options, and we're looking at the regulator. And you know, the utility regulator, you know, it has let us down. Others have said that, but our economic system has let us down, and also our government has let us down. We criticize bodies, the profit motive that comes in, and ordinary people then are a second thought when it comes to you know, their ability to be able to afford heat and fuel, and I think, you know, this is the problem now, where governments are existing to enable corporations to huge profit rather than protecting the needs of the most vulnerable in our society. And I think you know, Councillor Duffy had said there about the utility regulator not having teeth. Well, maybe they need teeth to be able to stand up to government and say, you know, we exist to protect the most vulnerable in society, exist to make sure that a crisis like this doesn't happen. Because the thing is, like, this crisis should never have happened, and it should never happen again, and we need to do all we can to put the systems in place to make sure that it never happens again. So I think we need to pursue this, these legal avenues, and also look at any other option that we can do to make sure that this you know, that we hit this crisis on the head as soon as possible, and make sure the most vulnerable are protected, but to make sure that we learn the lessons from this, so that so a crisis like this doesn't happen again. And at a time where we're one of the richest places in the world, where the inequality here is absolutely massive, where people have all the wealth, whilst the rest of us suffer. So happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Alderman McClantic.
Thank you, Mayor. Just I couldn't get the unmuted there. I suppose we're very much in a similar position to previous speakers. We all of us feel the need to do something, and to try to make real action happen. Certainly, we would have concerns about the time frame and how long it's going to take, even though I've heard Philip saying that it would be reasonably quickly, but we're obviously talking certainly some weeks, if not months. But I think that we should proceed to see if we have standing as a first step. I think we've got an obligation to do something in a situation, a crisis as deep as what it is. And I think the idea then, if we do have standing to take this forward, the idea of talking to other councils, which obviously would help with the cost, because I am mindful that not all those in our council area are are affected by this, and yet all, in a sense, in the long term, would actually be paying for the action that we take. We are in a situation, I think, we feel we have to do something. But I suppose one question just I would ask Philip, and I don't know whether Philip maybe has the answer, if anybody has the answer to this, is can we actually affect change from Stormont, or is it Westminster that needs to curb the rises? And I've heard this question asked on radio today, but I haven't heard any satisfactory answer. I don't know whether, maybe it's not Philip that can actually answer that, but I suppose it's just a thought in my head. But I suppose we would be, the DUP would be inclined to go with that first step of seeing if we have standing, to see if we can do something here, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Mayor, I think the position is certainly that it's the regulator that has got the powers to set a maximum price in relation to these matters, and that the regulator does operate as a department of Stormont, and consequently that, I suppose, is the answer. As far as that goes, obviously it's a statutory body, and as a statutory body it is answerable both to the Stormont legislation and to any primary legislation that might be coming out of the Westminster Parliament as well.
Thank you for that, Alderman McClintock, and thank you, Phil. Alderman Hussey, I think your question on the chat box has been answered on the chat box. Are you happy enough with that?
Yeah, the question has been answered, but then it develops another question, as to ministerial responsibility, as to whether the regulator has acted within, as Philip himself said, within ministerial policy. And, rather than the local council challenging this, surely to goodness, this should be, this should be challenged at a Stormont level. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Alderman Hussey. Thank you, members. I see no further speakers in the chat box. Councillor Doyle, do you want to come on and close?
Thank you, Mayor. Just really wanted to say thanks to everybody who spoke. Regardless of what's going on outside, we're all in the same boat here. And we've all got people's best answers at heart. So let's see where this goes. At least, if nothing else, we'll be able to tell people, if when we get to the end of this road, that we did absolutely everything we could do. So again, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Philip.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Doyle. Okay, members, I'm not hearing any dissenting voices in this proposal. If there's anybody looking to abstain or go against the proposal on the table from Councillor Doyle, could you let me know in the chat box now, or let me know on screen? Okay, members, the proposal passes unanimous. That brings that part of this meeting to a close. I'm going to ask now Paul to take us to the confidential, please.